My granddad told me the most important thing you can take while hiking in the mountains is the radio. He showed me his one. It was a small, battery-powered one that barely weighed a thing. So basically, on his advice, I got a license for a radio so I could use it every trip I took. No matter how many advances have been made in cell phone technology, most modern cell phones cannot hold a signal in the mountains and therefore are unreliable in an emergency. A radio can help pinpoint exact locations for search and rescue parties and exchange information about weather and other warnings. In a true SOS emergency, you would want a radio. So this is my granddad's story. He said that he set off climbing in the mountains with his radio. It was summer, and he planned a 3-day and 2-night camping trip. He left at 3 p.m. and was looking forward to camping, so he only hiked about 2 hours when he started to set up his camp at around 5. He camped in a place where he had camped before with some of his hiker friends. He described it as a calm and safe area. He made a fire, prepared dinner, ate well, and drank beneath the fading bright summer sky. He took out his radio and scanned to see if anyone was in the area. He said he often chatted with other hikers and even strangers on his radio. It was a good way to share information and help one another. The frequencies he used were 144 and 430 megahertz. These are standards for radio. My grandpa tried to make the range of his frequencies as wide as possible, and he was able to receive transmissions from various frequencies. This is an account he heard from his radio that night. There was static when he heard someone over the radio say, "I'm at the point, another pass, and I guess this place under something, I don't know if there's anything you can do for me." Grandpa responded by stating his location, asking for their position. "Stood by the great fence is where I am. Around me I can see a lot." Grandpa obviously couldn't make out what the guy was saying, so he asked again. "Face rock. I'm at Face Rock." Face Rock, my grandpa thought. Then it dawned on him that a few hours from his location there was a famous landmark. It was a rock which looked as if it had a face. He knew the place well and would leave in the morning to find this person if they needed help. "Please confirm. You're by the rock shaped like a face. Should I call in a search and rescue team?" Thereafter, nothing but static hissed back in response. It was a creepy state of affairs. My grandfather felt that the person who spoke was in danger, and he thought he should call search and rescue before it got too late. Things were even stranger because no matter how many times he radio searched and rescue, he never got a reply. His radio was also suffering significant signal loss, which really stumped him. With little other options, my grandpa turned in for the night, in the hopes that he would find this stranded person himself at the rock shaped like a face in the morning. He barely slept that night, originally intending on leaving at 6 a.m., but he left at 4. He was very concerned. While he was walking, he was trying to get in touch with the stranded person again and again, and eventually got a reply. "I am still here." "That's great. I'm about an hour from you. Can you stay there?" "It's really weird around. I'm a bit scared." "Do you need search and rescue medical support? Let me know how I can help," my grandpa replied. "Oh, not any good, man. I don't know what to do." He said that the voice seemed to be horrified by something and was sounding more and more erratic. He connected with them with ease this time. He guessed it was because he was in a higher location. The search and rescue team had reported no missing people or any calls for distress in the last week. They were said that they were unable to get a team out there straight away, so they would get a regular helicopter patrol over the area. My grandfather now felt this person's chances of survival were firmly planted on his shoulders. When he heard this, he began to quicken his pace. He finally got to the face-shaped rock and immediately tried to connect with the distressed person. I'm not sure how to say it, but it's bad, the person replied. Where are you? Are you asking me if I need to know where you are? I'm just east of the face-shaped rock. It's no good. You just pulled something. It seemed as if the signal was a tiny bit better than last time. He must have gotten closer. Have you been in an accident? Grandpa asked. I don't know. Oh God, please, it's something. After hearing the terrifying plea for help, Grandpa radioed back to the search and rescue team and demanded more assistance. He would continue to search for this person until they arrived. The face-shaped rock was a chasm, a place where you would expect accidents to occur. The voice amidst the sea of static on the radio didn't seem to be in pain though. They seemed to be utterly horrified. He was searching everywhere in the chasm for any signs of life, a rucksack, footprints, perhaps even blood, but he found nothing. My grandfather was understandably exhausted at this point, so he climbed to the top of a large boulder and waited for the search and rescue team to arrive while attempting to contact the distressed person. It's been so long. I'm so tired. Can you hear me? Grandpa responded. I think I can hear you close. If you can hear me, I'm going to make some noise now. Just come to the sound of the noise or tell me the direction you hear it from. Due to the chasm, any sound should be clearly audible, even if it was minuscule. So Grandpa held a rock, and the sound was very audible. Ah, that was great. I heard it, man. What direction did you hear it come from? South. Definitely south. Did he say south? Because that was weird, Grandpa thought. If he heard the noise coming from the south, he would be north of my grandpa's position. But if you go north, there's nothing but a cliff face. This was around the time that search and rescue arrived, and Grandpa explained everything to them, and they told them that they would take it from there. Since my grandpa was drained at this point, he gratefully accepted, and after resting for a while, he began to head back down the mountain. He was in contact with search and rescue, all the while asking if they'd found the distressed man, but they hadn't, so he was trying to contact him himself. It's something here. So many. That was the last communication he had. Search and rescue were unable to make or find contact with anyone either. A few years later, my grandfather was telling this story to some of his hiking friends who said that there had been a body discovered by the rock which looked like a face. The victim had innumerable cuts all over the body. It is unsure if these incidents are connected, but he doesn't like to go anywhere near the face-shaped rock anymore. This happened many years ago during autumn. My parents told me we were going camping, and I was allowed to bring a friend. I couldn't wait. I knew it was going to be fun. So when the weekend arrived, my parents and my friend and I went off into the mountains for a camping trip. It was only a one-night trip, but that was plenty for me. Back when this took place, outdoor camping didn't seem as popular as it is now. When we arrived at the campsite, we were surprised to see that there were no campers in sight. To be honest, it felt a little bit lonely. I soon forgot about that feeling since I was a schoolboy, and I saw the campsite as our own private playground. We played by a nearby river and in the woods, and then later that night we had a campfire with a barbecue. It was really great. Just before bedtime, my friend's mood changed. Usually he was full of self-confidence, but when the sun went down, his spirits dampened. He started to get homesick and frightened. Eventually, he told me through tear-filled eyes that he wanted to go home. By the time he asked, it was far too late. My parents had had a drink and were getting ready for bed. We turned in for the night, the sounds of the forest all around us. It was pretty spooky out there in our tent, in the wild, but we were able to get to sleep without any issues. The next morning we left for home. We had planned to spend a little longer at the campsite, but because my friend was clearly in a bit of distress, we headed home early. We left while it was still dark out. I can't remember what time it was in the morning, but it felt like everyone wanted to leave as soon as possible. We wanted to return home, and since it was the weekend, my parents went up to their bedroom to take a nap or something. Well, they said they were going to take a nap, but I heard a lot of banging coming from up there. Anyway, it was still early in the morning, and I was quite tired. I was nodding off while I was sitting on the sofa watching the morning cartoons, and I woke up when the house phone rang. Back then, there were no caller IDs on our phones, so we had no idea who was calling, and I was hoping it would be Grandpa. My parents showed no sign of coming downstairs to answer the call. It just kept ringing and ringing, so I picked it up. "Oh, hey, good morning." The voice belonged to some girl I didn't immediately recognize, and based on my recollection, I would say she sounded around my age, or perhaps it was an older woman with a youngish-sounding voice. The more I think about that, the more I think it could be plausible. I was quite sure I had never given any of my classmates my home phone number, so I didn't say anything for a while, just listened. Anyway, camp last night was fun. The barbecue was really great too. Those shrimp were delicious. Oh, I had a good laugh when your friend, who's usually so cheeky and confident, started tearing up because he was homesick. Still, I kept quiet. I was still sleepy at the start, but now I was awake. Something wasn't right. I began to get scared. There were only us 4 at the campsite. How the hell did someone else know what we were doing out there? I couldn't answer that question by myself, so I asked the mysterious person on the other end of the line. After some silence, some potentially shocked silence, I got my answer. Not the answer I wanted nor expected. Because we were together the entire time. And with that, I heard a click followed by the dial tone. I was really freaked out, but I instantly thought that it must have been my friend pranking me. I called him immediately, but he said he didn't tell anyone about what we did at the campsite except his parents. He said he was so embarrassed by everything he didn't even tell them he was homesick. When my parents came downstairs from their nap, I asked them if they gave anyone our number or told anyone about the camping trip, but they said they didn't tell anyone or give anyone our number. The only person they gave our number to was the person who received them at the camping site. In the end, I guess, or maybe hope, is the abject word here, that it was a prank and nothing more. But I have a strange feeling that we were being watched by someone in the woods that night. And I just can't forget those last words I heard on the phone, because we were together the entire time. This happened 6 or 7 years ago, in late October one night, deep in the mountains. I was a student, and for some reason amongst my friends and fellow students, it was really popular to camp in the mountains alone. Maybe we thought it was really zen and cool, or a test of courage. It didn't involve anything too taxing, no hiking or anything like that, just a simple one-person camp out in the woods. It was like a rite of passage or something. Everyone would come back from their solo trip and have a story to tell, and I wanted to try and give it a go myself. I found a place to camp and set up my tent. I made a little fire, cooked a meal, and enjoyed the simplistic pleasure of achievement this gave me. I have a vague memory of staring at the embers of the fire. It was hypnotic. I was thinking of turning in for the night. The day's activity and the night air had taken a toll on me and made me sleepy. I casually looked up, and my eyes were drawn to the forest ahead of my camp. Just over the flicker of the fire, I saw a sea of dense trees no more than 20 meters ahead of me, and amidst those trees, I saw something pale. I stared at the trees, trying to figure out what it was I was looking at, and then I heard myself mutter, "Why is it only a face?" Because there between the trees I saw a face peering at me in the dark. The forest was pitch black, yet the face was visible, and about 20 meters away from the mouth of the woods. There was no reason why I would be able to see someone standing there without the aid of any light. The face seemed to float. It seemed to be at least 10 meters off the ground. Usually in situations like this, people run away or scream, but I felt completely calm. I thought I was just overtired or something. I prioritized doubt over fear and attempted to remain logical. After a minute or two of watching the face in the woods, or perhaps a minute or two of the face in the woods watching me, it disappeared. I was sitting there mentally asking myself questions about what I had just seen. My eyes were naturally drawn back to the fire, and the face which had appeared in the woods was suddenly beyond the fire. Up close, I could see that the owner of the face appeared to be around 40. The expression was completely blank. One word came to mind out there in the woods when I saw it up close, and that word was void. I was massively freaked out. How was this even possible? In the time it took for me to look away from the woods, it was right next to my fire. I was really frightened, and once again heard myself ask out loud, "What are you?" These words tumbled out of my mouth unintentionally. When I think about this incident nowadays, I'm at a loss as to why I wasn't in control of what I said that night. It was as if I was just responding with instinct, like the animals of the woods I was camping in, I suppose. Whatever I said seemed to have worked, because as soon as I posed my question, the face vanished. That face appeared because it wanted something. I just don't think it realized I wasn't vulnerable until it came close, and thank goodness my instincts kicked in. When I read about all the missing people cases which are reported across the world, somehow I remember that night and shudder, and wonder if that mysterious face in the night might have done something to me, taken me away, or horrors I can't even begin to imagine. What do you think? When I was in elementary school, I joined a camping trip for 2 nights hosted by the school during summer vacation. The campsite was about 2 hours from the nearest town. It was a proper camping trip. Even though it was technically a campsite, it wasn't very well maintained. There was a kitchen and a bathroom, and that was good at least. It wasn't just tents, but the place wasn't in great shape. Everything was kind of shabby and dated. The toilet was more of an outhouse, and it was way out in a field. The campsite was really close to some swampland, and on the other side was a cliff. Even I remember thinking as a kid, it seemed a really unsafe place to camp. We had plenty of activities, such as hiking and fishing in the day, and the campfire and doing dares at night. On the first night I was there, I took up one of these dares. I thought it would be a simple dare, but it was different to the ones I did at that age. This was a bit more intense. This was a dare that was created by the teachers. Go into the woods without a flashlight alone and stay there for a while. These were the rules, if we dared to. If you start running or you'll scream, you'll alert the wild animals and become one of the kids that goes missing round here. That's what the teachers said. I can understand that they were trying to make it fun for us, so I'm pretty sure that we were perfectly safe, but looking back on it, it felt a bit strange. We were told to be completely silent until one of the teachers came to get us. Even though I didn't really want to do this, I went along with it. I was somewhere far from home and far from civilization in the mountains. I was a pretty obedient kid. So I walked with the teachers and their flashlight out into the middle of the woods. It was so dark, and all I could hear were the sounds of insects and the slow sigh of the trees. I got to where I guess was the designated spot, and the teachers' flashlights went off, and I heard them trudge away over broken branches and through thickets of weeds and bush. When that flashlight was off, there was nothing but darkness all around. There should have been other kids close by doing the dares with me, but I couldn't hear anyone else about. I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or if they were closed, it was that dark. The air was acrid and warm, and it seemed to cling to my skin. I heard the occasional rustle of bushes and the call of the wild. Some unknown animal was barking in the distance, and I hoped that it was the distance. It was hard to say if it was far or near. I guess in reality I was only there for a few moments, no longer than 5 minutes tops. But it felt so long. I was so isolated, alone in the world. Then the flashlights came out of nowhere and came straight towards me. I was relieved that they were back and that I wasn't alone anymore. and we headed back to the campsite together. All the teachers were saying, "Oh, we're all lucky we didn't see anything creepy this year." We were all joking, and I guess we kind of felt brave and mature. It was good. The rest of the night was pretty uneventful, to be honest. The next day I noticed that my friend, who also did the dare around the same time as I did, was looking awfully frightened. She was looking at the cliffs. When I asked her what happened, she just replied, "Can't you see them?" I looked at her puzzled. "Come take a look." She took me to the edge of the field towards the cliffs. "Look down there." I looked down and couldn't see what she was talking about. There was nothing but a flowing stream, but my friend looked like she was on the verge of tears. "The kids with the red faces down there, can't you see them?" She could see a girl and a boy that I could not. She was shouting and crying. It had clearly upset her. Soon after, the teachers came over to see what all the fuss was about and try and console her, but just like me, they couldn't see what she was talking about. I was worried about my friend, but life on the campsite carried on, and as you know, now kids have short memories and attention spans. I guess we got distracted and forgot all about it. Later that night I was really tired, but a lot of the other kids were still awake and lively. I was snug in my sleeping bag on the verge of sleep, and I could hear them whispering excitedly and happily in the glow of the lamplight. Just as soon as I was about to fall asleep, I heard the tone of the kids around me shift. Excitement gave way for tension, and I heard them whisper, "Are you okay? Wait, let me go and get the teacher." I popped my head out of the sleeping bag and saw two girls leaning over another girl sitting on the floor leaning forward. The girl on the floor was complaining of pain. "It hurts. It's so heavy. Help me," she said. She was complaining of feeling crushed, and right before our eyes she folded. Her chin was nearly touching the floor. It was as if she had something heavy on her back. She cried and screamed, and everyone in the tent panicked. It was one of those huge outdoor tents, by the way. Everything was happening so fast. It was very stressful. Everyone was very frightened, and I never heard screaming like that before. The teachers came running in. One of them had a bottle of salt in their hand, and he sprinkled it everywhere, and he started hitting the girl in the back with his palm. And miraculously, the girl stopped crying and screaming, and she was up on her feet like nothing had happened. After that, nothing else really of note happened. We went home without issue, and on the coach home I spoke with my friend and the other group of kids that I wasn't friendly with about what happened. Some kids had different experiences. One said that when they went to the outhouse at night, there was a kid they didn't know, standing stock still just staring at them. Another kid said that they saw shadows everywhere they looked, humanoid shadows. I was really surprised that there were more experiences. The mountains are truly unusual places. My friend who saw those kids with the red faces has been mountain phobic since the trip, and I can't even remember why I wanted to go there in the first place. In April of 2016, I had done 9 days on the Appalachian Trail, and it was truly life-changing. So I had the camping bug bad. The whole year I was hammock camping any possible chance I got. The farm I grew up on sits on a hill overlooking a creek bottom area where tobacco and soybeans are grown. An absolutely beautiful area, and the creek looks more like a small river at times. This is an area where arrowheads are found often. Just a mile away, an Indian burial ground was excavated when I was in the 4th grade, where the high school sits now. I remember it very well, and it was a half-mile walking distance from my home. Our driveway at one time had been a country road. It's not dead-ended, but it's our property. But who knows when that happened? At one time it was a well-traveled route, probably back when the county was settled originally at the very least. After all, it was only a mile as the crow flies from the county seat. The old road cuts deep into the hills, and there is a little offshoot gravel road that diverges off that goes down to the creek bottom in front of our house. I was feeling nostalgic, and decided I was going to camp in the creek bottom at the end of that old gravel road. This is something we had done often in that general area growing up, and it felt as familiar to me as the back of my hand. There was an old barn that stood there when I was a little kid, but it was long gone, and I decided to make my camp on the opposite side of that road at the edge of the bottom, not even going as far as we usually did. I made a little fire, set up my hammock and chewed on a snack I had taken with me. For some reason I wasn't feeling all that comfortable. I was trying to settle down into the idea, but I was really ill at ease. Keep in mind, this is a place that is basically my parents' front yard, perhaps a quarter mile from their front door. I grew up here and have played in this very spot since I was a small child, but I was feeling extremely uncomfortable. I did 9 days on the Appalachian Trail without any feelings like what I was experiencing at that moment. I was determined to stay down there and laughed at myself. It was a pretty calm, quiet night. Then, all of a sudden, a big gust of wind blew through the camp. Out of a complete calm, it made no sense. I was basically surrounded by a clump of trees nestled up against a hill at the corner of the bottom. It was really odd for a gust of wind to come where I was. Then I really started to feel a heavy sense of foreboding. It was like I wasn't alone and that I was being watched. I was still trying to rationalize it when all of a sudden I heard a few deep snorts that sounded like they were in my general vicinity, at the most 15 feet away. But I heard no footsteps, no rustling, just snorts. I thought to myself it had to be a buck, but why couldn't I hear it moving? The hair on the back of my neck was now standing straight up, and I decided it was time to go. I packed up everything, doused the fire, and immediately walked up the hill. I felt like the whole time I was at camp, something was very agitated with me, and I had to get out of there fast. It was a very intense feeling, and it didn't subside until I was at least 50 feet away from where I had been. It wasn't the only time I had this kind of experience, but it certainly was one of the more memorable, for all the wrong reasons. This happened when me and my friends were out hiking in the middle of the Canadian forest. Absolute middle of nowhere near towns or even roads. So just for context, we were at least 120 miles or 200 kilometers deep into the Canadian forest, when we stumble upon something we wish we'd rather not seen. The first thing that hit us was the smell, overpowering and hideous. We carried on hiking a small while in the direction of the stench because it was on the trail, when we come upon a terrifying sight. There was a bear that had been crucified to a tree. Now, the bear itself wasn't the biggest, and the biggest they can get when it's an average male grizzly is 600 kilos. I don't know how the hell anyone managed to carry it up to the tree and then nail it to the tree as well. We all stare at each other in disbelief. The same questions popping into our mind. How did it get up there? And who or what could have done it? Nail gun and a crane? A few really strong dudes and a nail gun? All of these thoughts crossed our mind. But of course, as you already know, why the hell would anyone do this? Least of all, 200 kilometers away from the nearest town. We are in the absolute middle of nowhere at this point, and we all got the collective sensation that we needed to get out of here now. I've never really felt unease in the forest until that moment. All the sounds and noises around us became crystal sharp, and we were on edge to make sure nothing wanted to deliver the same fate to us as that bear. Now most people are probably thinking, good story, yeah, that never happened. And honestly, I wouldn't blame you. But it happened to me. And I know how far-fetched it sounds. but that's one of the reasons I don't go that deep into the woods anymore. You never know what's gonna happen or what can be out there when you're that deep, far away from everyone and everything. I lived on a large cattle station in New South Wales, Australia, until I was 16. A few years before we left, my dad and I were out looking for a few lost cattle in the back paddocks, which back onto quite steep rocky mountains. We were crossing a shallow creek when our horses started snorting and getting flighty. There was movement above us, high in the trees. My horse started rearing, and just as my dad reached over to grab my reins to settle the horses down, something big and grey dropped from the trees between us. Our horses took off in opposite directions, and it took all my strength to pull my horse up. My dad eventually came to me and was quite anxious about us getting away from there. I asked him what was wrong, what was it? It was a roo, he said. It had been gutted and dead a while by the smell. He threw another look over the shoulder, and we got moving a bit quicker. I heard him mutter to himself, "How the hell did it get up a bloody tree?" He never went out without a gun after that. There are stories about big cats out in the Australian bush. It's the only explanation we could ever come up with. But why they would gut their meal and not really eat it is beyond me. My husband, kid and I live out in the middle of nowhere on a plot of land that's about 100 acres. I say probably about 95 of those acres are wilderness with ATV and hiking trails that we and several of the previous owners created by exploring. We use that land for camping, hiking and hunting. We like to find a spot, clear it a bit, camp overnight. There's so much space we've never stayed in the same place twice. We've seen some kill sites, both old and fresh, lots of animal tracks, places where deers bed down, etc. I've even spent a lot of time hiking solo while the kids are in school or my husband's at work. Whether alone or with the family, we always carry a firearm for protection. A few weeks ago, we decided to load up our camping gear and start a new trail. We mark the trails we make with spray paint on trees, as we're pretty far out in the woods, having hiked almost an hour when the atmosphere seemed to change. I don't know who noticed it first, but my husband, who was leading the three of us, turned around and gave me a concerned look. The birds had stopped chirping, the insects were quiet, and there were no sounds around us. When in the woods, complete quietness is rarely a good thing. We continued onwards, hyper-aware of our surroundings, while our kids continued merrily talking. We came to the screen that marks the midway point of our property, and we stopped for a few minutes. My husband and I stared down at each other, and we both felt something was off, but we didn't want to scare our daughter. I finally broke the silence and said I suddenly didn't feel good and that we should go home. My husband nodded in general agreement, while our daughter voiced her protest. We turned around and started back. After going a few hundred yards, still in the silent wilderness, I looked to my right and saw a person crouched down in a ghillie suit about 150 feet off our trail. I'm very positive they saw that I noticed them, but they never moved. I cleared my throat to get my husband's attention, and when he looked back, I put my hand on the gun in the holster on my hip, which caused him to readjust his rifle in preparation for anything. I sped up my family and we hurried back home. I told my husband as soon as we were inside, and we decided to call the police and report the trespasser, filed a report, and was told to call again if we saw anyone. A few days later, my husband and I went out alone and set up a bunch of deer cams. We didn't go back out into the woods for maybe a week, and then he and I ventured out to retrieve the cam footage. Out of the 9 cams we placed, we caught a person in a ghillie suit in 2 images. We handed copies over to the cops to go with our report. We haven't gone back out since except to check the deer cams or gotten any other trespassers. It freaks me out even more thinking of the few times while we were camping that we heard walking near our tent in the middle of the night. We always assumed this was just curious animals. We later found out who it was. It was someone who had worked for my husband who had been fired for misconduct. He apparently had a thing for me and sent me some incredibly graphic and inappropriate texts which resulted in his being fired. We found out it was him after he broke into our shed in the ghillie suit and stole some stuff. We had a camera facing the shed and captured the ghillie suit creeper, but didn't know it was him until he tried to pawn something that had a serial number registered to us. The pawn shop notified us and notified the police. This takes place when I was 18 in the middle of the night. During this time in my life, I would often partake in night drives with two of my closest friends, Walsh and Dimitri. Because of our work schedules in college, the only time we could all meet up at once was during the night, sometimes even after midnight. With us living in a small rural New Hampshire town, one of the only things you could do at this time of night, besides visiting the 24-hour fast food establishments, was drive. Those who live in New Hampshire know that even the largest of towns are almost always surrounded by rural communities and forest, and as such, there are a lot of winding roads that cut right through nature. This makes for perfect scenic driving and a great opportunity to get bored young adults like myself to hang out and pass the time. During this particular night, we were out especially late on an early November night, past 3 a.m. in fact. We were doing our usual rounds, driving through the night, when something caught our eye down the road. Usually out in the sticks, especially if it's New Hampshire, it's not uncommon to see wildlife such as white-tailed deer, raccoons, or even a turkey. So you always have to be on your guard, especially when driving through the night. One thing we did not expect, however, was a white Jeep Patriot parked on the side of the road near some mailboxes with its hazards on. Now, my friend Dimitri is infamously known for being loud and causing trouble. One of his favorite pastimes when he's in the car with us is yelling random things at passers-by, and when he saw this car, either as a joke or out of genuine concern, he rolled down the window and yelled, "Are you okay?" as we sped by. I expected nothing of it until I noticed something alarming in my rearview mirrors. The headlights of the car we passed had not only turned on, but were starting to get bigger. Next thing we knew, the white Jeep Patriot was right behind us, but it was at that point it did the unthinkable. It went into the lane of the opposing traffic next to my car and immediately swerved right into us. Whoever was in this car, we had apparently angered, and they were attempting to run us off the road. In a span of 20 seconds, the situation went from being slightly humorous to absolutely downright terrifying. My little sedan would not be able to hold up against a Jeep. Going on pure instinct, I turned off my car's lights and floored it, using only the faint moonlight of the road to navigate. I was going at 60 in a 35 zone, navigating off moonlight alone down a dark country road at 3 a.m. I understand that many of you hearing this will think it was incredibly dangerous and a dumb idea, and you'd be correct. However, the potential alternatives were even more dangerous, and I was not willing to find out what they were. After gaining a huge lead on the white Patriot and coming out of sight of it, I eventually turned down a dark cul-de-sac, parked my car next to the center island, and turned it off, making sure all interior and exterior lights were off. Less than 30 seconds later, I saw it speed by on the main road, and we were in the clear. The three of us spent 10 minutes collecting our thoughts in complete silence before turning the car back on. I dropped my friends off at their homes without a word, save for goodbye, and got home safely and tried going to bed. But I was so shaken up, I was unable to sleep that night. The next day we considered filing a police report, But what could the police realistically do in this situation? To this day, we have no idea why that white Jeep Patriot attempted to chase us off the road. Perhaps the driver thought we insulted them, or perhaps they were doing something illegal, such as going through the mailboxes that we were parked next to. We will likely never know. I was 15 years old at the time of this occurrence. I lived in a very remote area in Montana. All that was around is plains, towns, and farmland, and of course some trees. Me and my family moved here from another town in Montana about 5 years ago. We never had any problems with our neighbors before, well, up until this day. My brother had a friend over at the time called Alex. My brother and Alex were going on a bike ride pretty early in the morning to Alex's old neighborhood, and then my brother happened to get a headache. So I decided to go for a ride with Alex because I felt bad that my brother couldn't go. I thought it would be a quick bike ride with Alex to his old house. It took about an hour to get there. He lived on a road called Heaven's View. On the way, he was talking to me about his insane old neighbor who charged at Alex with a knife, and many, many more occurrences. Alex's family even had to go to court over how the neighbor acted. He also told me that his neighbor was a felon. That part was really interesting. We checked out his old house. It was actually pretty nice, not gonna lie. I took a glimpse at his neighbor's house, and it wasn't half bad. Nicer than the house I lived in, and I didn't think much of it. Me and Alex started to head back. Keep in mind, both of us did not have our phones on us, and we were riding on a gravel road that had nothing but washboard under it. We noticed this red Ford F-150 coming at us, so Alex and I pull over. The truck is centimeters away from hitting us. Alex looks at me with a terrified expression. It actually freaked the hell out of me. I yell out, "What?" And then Alex says, "That's them." I instantly knew what he was talking about. It was the psycho neighbors. I look in my rear view, and on my bike, I see the truck whip around really quickly. My heart started to race, and I signal Alex to book it ahead. We start going very fast, and then I see a four-way, gravel on one side, pavement on the other. I pull up next to Alex and tell him to turn last second on the gravel to the right. I turned around, and the guy driving was really skinny looking with his hood up. I was so terrified. We turned instantly, and the guy in the truck almost hits a tree, but he got wound up in the ditch. Saw a big bush to hide him behind his driveway. The guy thankfully did not see us go into the driveway, as he stopped right next to the bush and drove away. A really sweet old lady came out, and she texted my dad on her phone to come pick me and Alex up. My dad gets there, and we put our bikes in the back of the truck and go back to my house. On the way back, we see the truck speed ahead of us, and Alex and I frantically tell my dad that he is the guy who tried to chase us. My dad tried to speed up, but the truck was too fast and got away. I know for a fact my dad would have kicked his teeth in for chasing a 13 and 15-year-old. I have learned to never go into that neighborhood again, and thankfully, nothing else has happened since this encounter. This was something I really had a hard time coming to grips with when it happened when I was 13, back when I was living in Houston, Texas. I lived in the suburbs. It was a nice, bustling area, and I was always around people, whether in the apartment complex I was in or just going about my day. I was never truly alone. I had a good friend I still frequently talk to called Sarah. Her grandmother lived in Louisiana. I had never been one for long road trips, but thought having a nice girls' weekend with her would be fun, and I would bite the bullet and try to enjoy myself for this car ride with her parents, me, and her in a stinky old minivan. Her grandma wasn't the nicest, but she liked me well enough, I think. We were out in the middle of the woods. She was extremely close to the Kisatchie National Forest, so the homes were spread far apart and the woods were vast, the middle of nowhere. Her grandma had a thing for people being too close to her, so my friend and I were out in the woods playing and exploring these dense woods behind her property. There was a nice creek, and the trees seemed to muffle the outside world. There were birds chirping, and we saw lots of wildlife, lizards, squirrels, and chipmunks. This forest was crawling with life. It was amazing. We must have been out there for at least 2 hours because the sun started setting. We started to get antsy to return back. Now her grandma had a huge property, and she enjoyed her space, so you must understand there were no houses or neighbors beside her. She basically spent a fortune on her space. So anyway, we started following the winding creek back up to her house, since it was vertical to her place. When there was a noise behind us, it sounded like a wolf or a dog. I stopped and my friend heard it too. We listened. The noise persisted. There was nothing more terrifying than absolute silence and actually hearing something behind you, following you. We were a ways away, but we both were frozen in fear. I was expecting it was a coyote or some wild dog, but the footsteps from the dark drew closer. I heard a ragged breath that sounded almost less dog, more human. It started off quiet but grew louder and almost ravenous as it got closer. I slowly turned around as my vision adjusted to the dark. Now it sounded like something was dragging its legs through the leaves. Then it stopped. There was more silence. Nothing. No sounds, no panting, nothing. We were both petrified. We were now too scared to move an inch, because whatever it was that was with us was so close, it would surely outrun and overtake us. Then we both heard the most bizarre sound in our lives. It was a deep, long moan, but it took us both by surprise. I managed to take a quick look at whatever it was. The sound was coming from a tree a couple of feet away from my friend, and that's when I saw it. One hand was gripping the tree, and through the dusk, I could see paper pale skin and the eyes. I'll never forget them. They were wide and the mouth was gaping like that of a dead fish. I didn't have time to analyze if it was man, woman, or demon. Whatever it was, I just wanted to escape the woods. The sound stopped as I locked eyes and I felt my heart stop. My friend managed to tear herself out of her trance that we were both in, grabbed my arm and we booked it. We both started screaming and yelling to hopefully scare whatever was coming after us. Neither of us heard any noises behind us since we were so pumped on adrenaline, running and screaming, running and screaming. We didn't stop till we slammed the back door and locked it. Not 10 minutes after we got back, I demanded to go back home, and my friend was just as shaken up since both of us refused to stay in that house. So we got a hotel at a nice nearby place, and I left the next day. I tried to be in a good mood for the rest of the time I was there, and honestly it was a great trip, other than that walk in the woods. Her grandmother actually died 2 days after we left. Being alone on a crazy property like that, I was surprised a neighbor a few miles away came even to check on her. We were not sure how she died, but my friend and I still have our suspicions. As a younger kid with uncaring parents, I'd explore outside a lot, living in a relatively rural area with no civilization for miles. Once I'd stumbled across an abandoned barn which had burns all over it and a large hole in the roof, as if some sort of object had crashed straight through it. But that's not even the weirdest part. There were pristine baby clothes without one wrinkle that were neatly folded around the entrance of the barn. I still have no clue to this day why those would be there, especially in an extremely unpopulated rural area. Could it be a homeless person? If so, why would they need the baby clothes? It definitely scares me. My friend and I were hiking several miles to camp in the wilderness. It started raining with sleet. It's about 35 Fahrenheit, and late in the afternoon. We were 9 miles in, and there were no connection trails near this one. We see an older guy walking towards us on the trail, and it's the first person we've seen since we started. He's got zero equipment, soaking wet and wearing tennis shoes, t-shirt and blue jeans. He slurred, "It's beautiful out here, very quiet, and callous." The closest town in the backwoods, and known for drugs and meth. My friends and I have a few $1,000s worth of hiking and camping equipment on us. We get nervous talking to him and start walking away. He followed us for 50 yards, back for another 3 miles, and then we didn't see him again. But we didn't get much sleep that night at camp, wondering if he was just milling around, waiting for the opportune moment while we were asleep to steal our stuff for drug money or do something terrible to us. It was an unpleasant situation I would rather never happen again. About a year ago, I was at my cousin's house. Her house is at the end of a village and completely surrounded by forest, very isolated, and we decided we should go into the forest to have a kind of trip. We started walking into the forest, and we go into a part which, weirdly, it gets really dark once you enter, which is very strange, sort of a vacuum. So from what I knew at the time, once you entered that dark place, you're about 3 meters when you came across a beautiful lake, and when you got there, instead of a lake, we came across a mass grave of sheep. The lake was gone, and all that we could see were the remains of all these sheep. It was incredibly frightening for us, and of course we left shortly after. On a return visit, we went on what we thought was the exact same route, and we found the lake again. So this perplexed us. We still don't know why they're there or how they got there, but we never found them again. It was one of the more bizarre experiences we've ever had. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's scary stories from the middle of nowhere. If of course you did, you can let me know down below. Don't forget to sub, press the bell icon, and all the good stuff. Huge thanks as always to my members and patrons whose names you could have seen on screen for their contributions. Tomorrow I've got some exclusive members and Patreon only content that's dropping, so if you're one of those, be sure to check out these platforms tomorrow. Until next time though, hopefully see you Thursday for some terrifying ghost stories. So, until next time, stay awesome and good night.